My name's Justin Miller, and that's Sherwyn, Saul, and Ben Brautigam in the middle here. We work for kind of a R&D group for Penn State where we kind of get to design applications, products that are used educationally. We're going to go over our one-button studio solution. If you haven't heard about it or know what that is, I'll fill you in, and then we're going to dive into the code a little bit, and we're going to talk about the issues that we encounter going into the App Store, the way we had to change our solution to get into the App Store for distribution, and some of the hurdles we had to overcome programmatically, and some that we're still trying to overcome, so that you can kind of get an idea of how working with hardware in an OS X app works. So first, I'm just going to go into the one-button studio. At Penn State, we support video technology for the students and faculty and staff to use. And that used to look like this, a traditional studio. We had 21 of these located around the state that we supported. The problem was nobody wanted to use them because nobody wanted to figure out how to set up lights, how to use a green screen, set up audio, set up camera. The camera had a whole bunch of buttons on it. So that was difficult for everybody to use. So one of the things we came up with was the one-button studio. And we wanted to take a studio and automate all of those steps that are difficult in a typical recording studio. So as you can see here, you'd have so many steps in a traditional studio that might include going in, setting up the equipment, recording the video, capturing it to the computer, reviewing it, exporting it so that it's available and usable on the web. With the one-button studio, we were able to achieve that. You basically just go in, hit record. The moment you're done, your video is available and web ready on your thumb drive. This is the way the studio looks, typically, a typical studio. You have lights mounted on the ceiling, so again, the users don't have to know how to set up lights. Everything is automated with equipment in the cabinet. You have a camera, projector for presentation practice, and a microphone hung from the ceiling to capture audio. Here's a camera and projector side by side. So basically, this is the first thing a user sees and interacts with when they walk into a studio. They just plug in their thumb drive, and at that moment, everything automates. I'm going to give you a little demo here at the end of these slides. And once everything's ready, they just press the button to turn it on to start the recording. At the end of the recording, they press the same button. It stops, saves their file, their video to the flash drive. Let's take a look at the... Actually, I'm going to save that for last. So again, we created this solution, and we wrote the software, which basically lives on a Mac Mini or any Macintosh computer. And it is available for free on the App Store, and that's part of what we're going to go over today, is how we're able to make it available and some of the hurdles we had in dealing with the App Store. The studio solution costs roughly between $7,000 and $9,000 to build one of these. The app is free, however. This is just for the actual hardware. And this slide kind of speaks to how important it is that the app function well for us. In the last 2 years, in just 2 studios, we had almost 9,000 users. 13,000 videos were created, and we saw an increase from those traditional studios that I showed you earlier of over 2,000% increase in usage. It's because we made it simple. We automated it. So let's see the app. So this is the screen, and I apologize, it's a little cut off because of the projector that the user sees. They would see that thumb drive or that USB hub that you saw earlier that they could plug into. This is the first screen they see. So when they plug in, what happens is the app starts automating, it starts working. What it will do is in a few seconds it will connect with the camera, and it will turn on the lights, and it will connect with the audio. So now the user's all set and they're ready. They can get themselves in front of the camera and get the projector started if they choose to use it. And at that point, they just press the button, which is actually just mapped to the space bar. They get a countdown so they can get back into place. And now they're recording. They also see a count up on the screen. This allows them to keep a presentation or record a video within a time limit that they may have for whatever reason. So after they're done, they come and press the button again. It's going to write the file to the device. When it's done, it'll say session complete after a few moments. And at that point, they have an H.264 QuickTime ready file that can be readily and easily uploaded to YouTube or Vimeo or wherever else you want to go. So if they're done, they can press the button again and do another recording, or they can unplug it. Everything will turn off and reset for the next user. So before we get into one other thing, before we get into the code, I'm just going to talk about the signal flow. For the studio, typically we have a microphone that's hooked up to a camera, and the camera will then mux the video with the audio. And then from the camera, we have HDMI into this live encoder, and this spits out a transport stream of H.264 video. It has about a second and a half or so delay. So from here, it's going USB into the computer. And to control the lights, the application that we wrote will spit out an AppleScript command to kind of a companion app. In this case, it spits out a command to an app that will talk to this Power over Ethernet midspan, which will then power over Ethernet our light. So next we're going to talk about the app itself, get into some of the code, some of the hurdles that we had to overcome. So feel free to start asking questions at any point. And Sherwyn's going to go ahead and plug. You could do stereo if you wanted to. Yes, you can simplify. So you may not want a green screen. You may not want a projector. You can just do straight video. In fact, the American we do have kind of an equipment list and setup guide available on the website, and that is for a more typical set studio.
The other thing to that, I'm not sure if this is working, but since we use the Blackmagic H.264 box, we can plug and play any HDMI camera. So if an institution, doesn't want to spend a lot on a camera, they can get a $300 camcorder with an HDMI out or in, or if they, depending on their needs, they can spend a lot more money and get a camera to their liking, and it'll all work with the same system.
So one of the things that you didn't see when we first started up is, or when I first start the app, in order to initiate the entire process, the app is looking, it has like a watcher, it's looking for a mounted drive to the volumes directory. And that was real easy for us to code, relatively easy. However, going to the App Store, and that was kind of our first hurdle, is the App Store, it now uses sandboxing. And Ben will explain that in a moment if you've never heard of the term. But basically, it forces you to keep your app self-contained. Just like an iOS app, now the Mac OS X apps have to be self-contained. They can only save to the user folder. They can only access stuff in the user folder without user prompting. So at the launch of the app, we actually have to ask the user for permission to access the volumes directory so we can write straight to your thumb drive and we can watch that for that folder change.
And do you want to talk about that first? Or?
Sure.
All right, let me get that up for you.
Yeah. Do you want to use this?
Is this working?
Working.
Oh, okay. So sandboxing, as you may know, Sandboxing app provides a strong defense against malicious code and while protecting user data. And since we wanted to have One Button Studio on the Mac App Store, Apple requires all Mac Store apps be sandboxed. But as you've seen, our app needs to access some outside resources in order to function. Primarily the volumes directory, because we're plugging in a thumb drive. It needs to save to a certain location that video. Also, the current One Button Studio uses Indigo to turn on and turn off the lights, and that's via an AppleScript that OBS sends out to a third-party app to do that. So we needed to make entitlements that allow us to do so. So this is our entitlements file. It allows us to, you can see under App Sandbox, it allows us to access the movies directory, to use a USB device, and And then I guess the most important one is down there on the bottom. Let me just expand this.
Yeah, that's it right there.
So we needed, again, that third-party app integration. We needed to be able to send commands to an app outside our own. And Apple allows a temporary exemption to this. So we needed to add the entitlement for the Indigo server. So we requested a temporary exemption from Apple, and we added the string for perceptive automation that their Indigo server. So that allows us to talk to that app and only that app within our own.
And Apple actually only approves these temporary exceptions on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
So you can't just add this and expect it to go through their app review without explaining why you're doing this. So we can't talk to other apps with our app on the App Store without these temporary exceptions and without Apple's approval of why we are doing something.
So we were really excited. We had our app ready to go. We submitted to Apple. Next day rejected because we did not have that temporary exemption in place. But from the research we did, we added that, and then we drafted a long memo as to why we need to use this and how it's being used. We even they asked us to take a video of someone using the app in a real studio. And that's the level of detail that they're looking for in this kind of thing. So by this temporary exemption, it allows us to talk to an app outside our own, and it allows us to access the other items on that list to make the app function really well. Definitely. Yeah. The cool factor does help.
All right, so I am going to just talk a little bit about the code. A few things that we've done. So make MP4 is really the meat of the application. So basically, we're using avfoundations, which is it's not new anymore, but it was relatively new to Apple. That's how they deal with the video and audio inputs and outputs. Now, this is like an interesting thing for me because I'm a web programmer. I'm a Ruby on Rails guy, so to get comfortable with Objective-C was painful. But then I noticed some of the strengths of Objective-C. And so there was a little bit of a learning curve there. So just personally, it was a little bit difficult. But I think in time, I got to understand why Apple used Objective-C and the strengths of it, as I said before. But anyway, so avfoundations is what we use. And the main part of any application, avfoundations, is the AV asset. We needed to get the transport stream that was coming from the H.264 box into an AV asset, and from there we could do different things. So if you see up there, it says AV asset ts_file. This is me taking the raw TS file and changing it into a TS asset. Now this box spits out, as Justin said, a TS file, but it also spits out now packets, so that's network application layer packets. It also has audio packets as well. And so in different areas of the code, we actually grab the now packets for certain things. We grab the audio packets for certain things. And but the nice thing about the TS packets that we wrote to file is they do the
So that was actually our first hurdle, was working with this box, simply because Apple doesn't make it easy to work with non-Apple hardware or hardware that's not kind of registered with Apple or has been written specifically for Apple products or an Apple OS.
Right.
So there is an SDK with the box, which we were able to leverage. The problem is that the OS doesn't see that as a video device. So if it saw that, if the OS saw this as, and this is Apple's terminology, as a video device, we would be able to just pull that stream right into a memory buffer using AV Asset, display it, and record it all at the same time. It would have been great. We'd have been done in a couple weeks, and we wouldn't really have anything to talk about. But because it doesn't do that, we are basically just getting packets. This is just data coming into us. So we have to figure out how to parse those and what to do with them. And as Sherwyn was saying, when we first thought we would get the NAL packets of video because the SDK kind of had a sample app where it showed you a display of those packets. And we thought, well, let's record that display. The problem was we were getting a lot of dropped frames. That means the video would skip a couple frames. And then we tried to take the TS packets that were coming in into an AV asset and then try to record them. Well, it turns out the AV asset isn't equipped to handle that sort of thing. It's not there. So what we did was we just, rather than taking those packets into a memory buffer, we just dump them to a file. And it turns out that Apple, after you've dumped a whole bunch of TS packets into a file, can now miraculously read it. But it can't read it on the fly.
Right.
And then what Sherwyn's doing here is after we stop the recording, we basically just cut off the packets. So the difference between, in video terms, there's, especially when you're talking about data and files, there's two terms. There's program stream, which would be your regular MOV file. And then there's transport stream, which is what's coming in from a network connection or streaming in from another device. The transport stream has no header and footer. So when the OS reads that file or an application or player reads that file, it doesn't know how long the file is. It has to actually analyze it to see how long the file is, what the length is, the size, all the metadata that would be associated typically with a video file. It has to build that on the fly because it's not written into header information. A program stream is, that transport stream doesn't play well in QuickTime. You can do it, but it gets a little funky. You get those green blocks. I'm sure you've all seen that when you're streaming off a web server. When you go forward, you get that kind of artifacts. So what Sherwyn's doing here is he's taken that file after we've stopped recording it, and he's doing a process called flattening it. And by flattening it, he's actually doing that analysis of the file to build all that metadata and all that header information. And he's using, now is where we leverage AV's asset because it's good at bringing that in, analyzing it, and then building a program stream file that gives you that header information so that it can play well in QuickTime and can be easily uploaded to, say, YouTube or other services.
Right. And I'm glad that Justin said all that stuff because I was really looking for him to just say MUX. I forgot the terminology because, again, I'm a web programmer, and I got a crash course in how incredible it is to see video, even from the byte level, and I'll get into that a little bit, or the bit level even. I'll get into that a little bit later. But so basically, everything that Justin said, and so later on, once we get to the AV export, yes, I can. Should be better. Let me move this.
Yeah.
So as Justin was saying, so we basically got a TS file, raw data that we wrote to the file system, and what we wanted was an MP4 at the end of everything. Like after we did everything, what was written to the USB stick was going to be an MP4. So we just basically took that TS file, put it in a container, MP4, and we wrote it to the USB stick. Now we had to use a process. I'm looking for it here. It's actually a pass-through. This right here. Right. So you can send a whole bunch of different constants basically to the init with asset. Let me get it down a little bit because you can't see that. Init with asset preset name. So you can allow the TS file to be put into an MP4 container that would have a certain resolution or for certain devices and things of that nature. But it would take, I guess it would take a long time because there'd be some reprocessing going on. But when you pass it AV asset export preset pass-through, the process is very quick. It's basically just putting the container around the video file.
So what what the presets would do are they're just kind of re-encoding presets. So if you had a really large file and you were writing an app to re-encode it into something smaller and more manageable, you would give it a preset of H.264 or AAC, whatnot, and it would re-encode it, it would reprocess the file. We want to pass through because our original file is already encoded live on the fly. So we don't want the user to sit there after they've recorded their video and wait for half the time it took them, half the time of the recording itself before they have a file. We want it to happen as quickly as possible so that they can get in and out so that we can have those 13,000 videos created in 2 studios.
You also don't want to use a Mac Pro to speed it up either.
Well, no, because then you have cost issues with the Mac Pro. There is some hardware that will speed up that processing, but if we can do it on the fly, then it was a better option for us.
Right. And
Yeah, go ahead.
What is, when you put the header and footer and you package it, what's the typical end file size?
So the file size doesn't change all that much. So the transport stream file that we're initially getting, each packet has a header and footer, and that's just kind of the byte level header and footer. It has nothing to do with the video. That's so when it comes across, we can verify that it's all there. So we do reduce file size a little bit because we can throw all that away. But this is 3 megabits per second. So a minute of video is roughly, what, 120 megabytes or so. And we're not re-encoding it, so it's just, it is what it is. When this avfoundations as a library, is I guess the term you'd use, is fantastic for video files or for video effects and processing. It's not great for streaming. So for our use, we were able to utilize it a little bit. But it's really simple. There's really not a lot of code once you have a file to pull it in and say, okay, I want to do something different with this, which in this case is wrap a container or a file type around it and pass through the encoding. Because it'll analyze that. That pass-through, it's going to analyze, okay, what is this? It's H.264. It's AAC audio. I'm not going to change that. I'm just going to wrap a container around it.
Right. And then, so the way AV foundations work, the way the framework is, you set up or you configure some objects, and then there are some callback functions that are called to process what you've just configured, right? So once you get down to the asset export, you've already set up your AV asset. You've already configured some of the AV export with the output file type. Again, the asset was set up with the TS file. Some timing configurations that the time range. And then you just do the export. Now I put the export into a thread because if I remember right, when I didn't put it in a thread, it actually was locking up other processes that we were running in the background. So I put it in a thread and let that run while I was doing some other stuff. And so the way it works is the callbacks. The callback will set the status of the asset export. So if you have your export session complete, if that's what comes back for the status of the asset export, then everything went well, and then you can do some other processes. If it didn't, this is a failure right here, and we have some other code to try to work out the failure. So we encountered times when if a user started recording something and they stopped it real quick, AV Foundations it basically didn't write the MP4, but the TS file was still there, and so we used other processes to take that failure and turn it into a success. And so when it fails, we try to use another function. It's called alternate make MP4, and it uses the AV reader and the AV writer to write a file, as opposed to this export, which is a little bit easier and compact. When you use the reader and the writer, you're basically breaking out some of the functionality that the asset export basically that export asynchronously with complete handler and all that stuff, that does a lot of work for you. So when that doesn't work, then you have to break that up and start doing the work yourself, and that's what we did. And then if you can send I think you can make the status canceled, and I just have an NS log going there to just show that it was canceled. And there's a lot of NS logs here. If you know, we do that for our purposes, almost like debugging things. When you go to production, if you don't want that stuff, you can just put in a I think it's an if-def. I worked on another application called Mirror, and let me just put this up here. You can just pop this into your, I forgot the name of the file. Yes, the .pch file, and that gets loaded before all other files that are getting run. And so this basically gets rid of NS logs. Sometimes if you want an NS log, what you can do is you can write this if and def, and you could change the way NS log runs. So you can do, I don't know, like debug NS log. So anytime you want to write something to the log, you'll write that debug NS log instead of NS log. And then you'll still have NS log if you need it for production.
Go ahead.
I have a kind of unrelated question.
Yes.
Have you ever tried like sending this off to like a paper trail or a logging service? I developed an app and we just, if there's an active internet connection, you could just send it off to a cloud log.
Oh,
Can you redefine it that way?
I don't think it shouldn't be too difficult. I mean, if they have an API that, if there's an Objective-C API, well, technically you don't really even need an Objective-C API, but yeah, then we should be able to do that.
So we wouldn't do that for our solution, but as Sherwyn said, you could. One of the things the NS logs helps us with, though, because of security, we keep our studio kiosk computers offline because we don't want, so the less steps from the user going in to actually recording the video, the better. So we don't want to have to force them to log in. So we just disable internet access on the machine, and the app is running 24/7. It never stops. Yeah, basically. The nice thing about the NS logs, though, on top of just our debugging as we're coding, and the reason we leave a lot of them in there is because if a user has an issue, or if, so we have like 14 of these studios built already at Penn State. Some of them are geographically separated across the state itself. And if there's an issue, I can ask the person running that studio, send me all messages from console. And now I can reference where their app was crashing with the actual code to see if there's any issues. So those NS logs become useful in other ways as well. We don't let them on the network at all. Now, eventually we're going to be adding to this app a true kiosk mode where you can't get, it'll maximize the app and you can't minimize it or get out of it without entering a password. Then we'll add internet access and we'll start doing more of maybe of that online logging.
A good example of the, oh, go ahead. I was just going to say a good example of the benefit of having these logs is when we first launched the app, we would get random, students it would just fail for some students and we didn't know why. And it turned out that there wasn't enough space on their flash drive. So what we did, exactly, and that's what we did. So
that's exactly
before it starts recording, the app does a check to how much space is available, and if there's enough, it proceeds. If not, it throws a message to the user that's saying you need to clear off some space in order to record your video.
Is it proactive in saying like you should have this amount of record time and kill it when it hits that time, or if it's near that point?
So we're not calculating projected file types or file sizes. We're just checking, because we know a minute of video is roughly 127 or so megs, 160 meg, whatever it turns out to be. So we're just saying you have to have at least 500 megabytes of video on your thumb drive. If you don't, you get a warning, which I believe you can pass over anyhow,
What if you record
or maybe
more
not.
than you can hold?
What's that?
What if you record more than you can hold at the end?
So the great part about this is it records first to the hard drive. It flattens it, which means it wraps that container around it, and then it copies that to the thumb drive. We don't clean up the hard drive recording until the end of the semester. So if there's ever an issue of a failed copy, or they ran out of space and it was naturally a failed copy, or the user unplugs before it's done copying, the files are named by timestamp, so the user can come back to a consultant or somebody working in the studio and say, hey, I'm missing my file, or it's corrupt, or whatever. They can log into the machine and get that file.
And
Go ahead, you had a question.
oh, sorry.
If you had a network-enabled machine, you could obviously put that path to the network folder.
Right. In fact, you can, with the app the way it is currently, you can just have kind of a companion app that maybe you have a card swipe or whatever that initiates the user credentials, and it can mount a network drive automatically, whether it's a Dropbox space or whether it's a streaming server space.
You're talking about cutting out the thumb drive.
You could, yes.
Yeah.
What I found in working with students and people with video, because I used to do consulting on those traditional studios, is users like to have something tangible in their hand. They're still a little uncomfortable with, oh, my video's up in the cloud, I didn't get a chance to review it, am I done or not? So they don't know. You had a question as well?
Have you tried forgetting video on the computer? Have you looked at the Canopus HD boxes for doing that?
I believe I took a quick look at them. They're relatively expensive, are they not?
$100 to $200.
Oh, really? Okay. Then I haven't seen that box.
That way, the AV Foundation recognizes it as a MUX device,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can just pull it directly in and
Right.
tell it what format you want it to come out as.
What input does it have?
They have different ones. There's an HDMI one,
Mhm.
and then one that'll take RGB component for S-video and
Right.
AV.
We'll have to take a look at that.
What was that called again?
Yeah.
Canopus.
Where were you a year ago?
Years ago.
Wow.
It's also where if you use like a high-end USB webcam.
You can. So the code doesn't support it yet, but we are looking at updating the code to allow webcam use, so that you don't need the box if you don't want it.
Yeah.
Plus, when you download the app, if you want to start testing it,
Yeah.
you kind of have that immediacy of being able to work with it.
And we can save this for the end, but we'll talk about other advancements we're working on. We currently have a dev version of this that we're playing with that provides a lot of advanced features and access. So.
Right.
Now, if you put that in the App Store just as a way of dispersing the application, is that kind of basically the way that people get it?
Basically, it was. We share this with other universities. We've been contacted by over 100 universities and institutions.
International as well.
Internationally as well, that want access to this technology. It's kind of something everybody's looked at a little bit. A lot of people have tried Podcast Producer and ways of creating presentations and video easily. And we just decided to develop our own because we have great relationships with a lot of faculty and a lot of students, and we were seeing that students were using flip video cameras, which were fantastic because they just had those big red buttons in the back. The problem is that students don't know enough to be in a well-lit area, and they don't know enough to be in a quiet area when using them. So you would get video that was dark and not good looking, and you'd get poor audio quality. It was hard to hear. So we thought, well, there is a use for a controlled studio space, but can we use that big red button? Can we mimic that workflow? And that's what this turned in. I mean, that was the inspiration to build this solution.
Because this is all about the user experience. I mean, we wanted to provide the easiest way to record high quality video and the best experience possible. And it's a self-service learning space. It's a kiosk solution. It's a walk-in. I've never seen it before, but I immediately know how to use it. That's the kind of thing we were looking to build, and we didn't see that anywhere else.
And in addition, the other reason we went to the App Store was because these studios are managed in a decentralized manner. So one campus. We have a campus in Erie. Their IT handles their studio. We have, I think, 6 or 7 studios at University Park here that are Media Commons, which runs our video support service. They run those studios. But another campus near Philadelphia runs its own studio. We wanted a way to easily push updates out to them without, here's this version, let's email it to you. So it was easy. It's just, hey, turn on the internet or plug in the internet and run Apple updates, and you'll get the next version. Yeah, go ahead.
Just curious, you said that you had people internationally contacting you. Could you localize this application, and if so, did you have any challenges?
So I did not localize this application. I've done that before from a web development standpoint. But to tell you the truth, I didn't realize how big of an issue this was. And so I was, as a developer, I was surprised actually that came about, but we haven't done any localization yet.
How are you planning to localize?
That's for my boss to let me know what the
Yes.
what the priorities are.
One of the things we looked at is, what if we there's not a whole lot of text in here. What if we just took all the text, put it in a preference pane, and allowed whomever to do their own translation and put in whatever they wanted? So if it was just in the preference pane, you could change the text on anything. Maybe you want the message to read slightly different or put up a support phone number. And that works here as well as allowing whomever to do whatever translation they want at their end. That way we don't have to worry about getting it right or wrong or the web service being slightly off on context.
Well, what I'm talking about with the web service is something where you take your localizable strings and you put them in a certain format, and then you put it on this web service, and people can volunteer to do translation and sort of check each other's translations.
Interesting.
So you could have like people from Sweden who want to use it, translate it, and make that available to everyone, and kind of like switch between all the different strings, you know, kind of maybe do some checking in Google Translate and be like, yeah, that sounds right, and put it out there and then make it available.
Wow.
So people can volunteer to do all the translation.
So
Roll that into the app, though. That's the,
No, it has integration to go into the app. That's what this is for. So out of this, you export with your localizable strings, and then it goes right into your app. So you have to do some work to be using strings that can be replaced.
Right.
Right.
But, you know, like you said, if you guys can just minimize the amount of language you need for your app in the first place, that helps a whole lot. And then you get all that nice work.
So that's a great point. And it is not that much text, so we probably wouldn't go down that route. But that's actually great. I had to internationalize or localize a site that was already running before at a previous position. And if anyone has ever done that, you know the hell that is, right? Because Google Translate is still not a person.
Yes.
You need translators, and that's why that almost that crowd translator part of that. Yeah, that's very attractive. That's great. Again, where were you a few years ago? Like,
Well, and has anyone here heard of Duolingo?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's an app that helps you learn a new language, and it's sort of gamification of that. And one of the things that actually is happening when you're using Duolingo is you're helping translate things. So as you get further and further along, you're like back translating and forward translating things, and then other people are doing the same thing and sort of checking you. So it's actually a
That's interesting.
translation service that's teaching you how a new language.
that's nice. That's nice. And just an aside on this. So I told you before, I'm a Ruby on Rails guy or whatever. And so the site I had to do that with was a Rails site, and they had all of these parts of the framework that enabled that internationalization. But again, at the end of the day, because we needed, it was a very content-heavy application, and because we needed the translators, and then to rewrite our code in such a way that it pulled in those the languages and the different locales and things like that, it became like a big issue. And that's why I like the fact that we don't have that much content here, not just because it makes my life easier, but one of the main things that we wanted to do is make this as simple as possible. We wanted the user to just come in and just feel like, wow, it really is a one-button studio. There's not a lot to do. The images literally tell you what to do.
Which is why feature creep is such a big issue for us. You know,
Yeah.
wouldn't it be great if it did this or did that or that?
Remote control that pauses it.
Right, right. But
Yeah, and those things come up. Like many people,
All the time, yeah.
they say, hey, wouldn't it be great to do this and great to do that? A matter of fact, even within our group, we think about that, and then we have to pull it back again. I mean, we have a philosophy that doesn't just guide our development for OBS. It guides our development, period. it's simple as possible. The lowest common denominator, get 80%. And for the 20%, there are things that we can do to make it easier for them. But there's so many people that, and you saw it by the numbers. You saw it by the numbers. There's so many people that will use something like this and won't use the thing that has a remote control or this, that,
Even
that
the person,
perfect app.
Even the person that asked for the remote control might stop using it because
Yeah.
remote control doesn't work. They can't quite figure it out.
Right, because you can do a couple of takes and then just go into your Adobe or whatever. Yeah.
It's almost like a philosophical thing, right? Like, it's like flexibility a lot of times. Doesn't have to be, but flexibility usually equals complexity.
But then again,
Yeah.
some of the feedback we've gotten and suggestions we've gotten are really relevant and really attractive, which led us to kind of design a preference pane for the studio administrator.
Right.
So when the app is first loaded into the studio, they pull up a preference pane that they might be able to adjust the countdown length. Maybe the studio is really big and the user might need more time to get back to their space. Or they need a higher quality video, so there might be a bitrate slider there. Or we're finding a way to automate a green screen really well, so they might be able to click that on. But that sets preferences for that specific studio. It doesn't take away from the user experience, it just enriches it a little bit more.
And just to
Those are
add to
kind
that,
of administrative preferences rather than user
Right.
dictated preferences.
and just to add to that, so these were things that were then brought to us, right? So we put out something that we thought was, hey man, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then our user base told us what we need to do. It wasn't just, hey, I think this is cool, let's put it in, right? And I think that type of development gives the people who are you're developing for a voice, right? It's just not like they have to march to the tune that you're putting out. So.
All right, so, but, and I know this is off topic, but how do you decide that? It's a free app. How are you deciding what's good feedback and what's just like the one-off user?
So
Right.
we're not making any money. We build for Penn State first. We're just happy to share it with everybody else.
So if someone from somewhere else asks for something like, oh, Penn State would benefit from that, then
If I can justify that it is worth our time for our users at Penn State, then we will do it. If it's not, I might provide some documentation on how you might be able to do that network mount. But I'm not going to go too far out of my way for outside of our users. Now, if we were grant funded, that'd be different. But we're not. We're funded by the student IT fee at Penn State. So those are our users. Our feedback mostly comes from them. We've had good ideas from, we maintain a Yammer Network, which you can email us at onebutton@psu.edu if you want access to it. But it's a Yammer network of other institutions that are trying to build one or have built one, and they might ask questions, and I can pop in there and answer their questions, or another person that's already done it can answer questions, that sort of thing. But most of our feedback comes from observing the students, working with the students. So I was one of the consultants that used to do that before I transitioned into my current position. And we would literally see, okay, if we give you two pieces of technology, which one are you going to use it? And now we can start asking why. So we saw that nobody would use a studio, but people were using flip video cameras. And then that begs the question, why? Why are they using it? Well, in that case, it was somewhat obvious. It was easy. We asked some of the students, but it was somewhat obvious. It was just easier. Why learn all of this other stuff if I can create my video project with this one-button solution? So that informed us to start down this path, and then we did a prototype in AppleScript and put it out there, and we got some feedback from people using it, grad students, just observation, and we continued to build and grow on that.
Long-term maintaining it, do you ever worry about putting it out there for free, it grows in its popularity, you're going to start getting emails like, oh, this isn't working, or how do you provide that tech support down the road?
So again, the institution with the most studios is us. So we're going to maintain it for us, and because we're maintaining it for us and publishing to the App Store, then when the new OS X version comes out, we're going to be on top of making sure that it works for that, and that sort of thing. Does that kind of answer your question? Is there?
Any apps you download, you're always getting the stream of people.
This isn't working, that isn't working.
Or it might be a user error on their part, and maybe he doesn't figure out the application, the administrator application part of it. Do you find it that you feel this burden to take care of the world once you've launched this thing?
So in our experience with the hundreds of people we have in our Yammer network, there aren't that many questions. Most of the universities that have them set up now were able to do it without asking a single question, just based off our documentation.
And that's a big piece.
And so, yeah, that's a big piece. But again, we do it because we're 3, and we can't set up all the studios. I mean, we have 14 or 15 of these studios, and we're planning to build another 5. It seems like every month there's another 5 and another 5. So we can't run around and do this full time because we're still developing the app. We're still doing this and the other thing.
Doing other apps.
Yeah. So part of having good documentation is also to support ourselves, which, again, we provide out. But on the Yammer network, it doesn't take me much time. Most of the questions that pop up are either the same or they're situations I've encountered in building 14 studios. So it doesn't take me much time to answer those questions. It does not seem like really a burden at all.
Our app is unique because you go to the Mac App Store and you download it on your laptop, but you can't use it. You need to buy all this other hardware and put it in this room and set it up. And it's a different experience. And we put together an iBook and setup guide that really details every step of that process. And so far, it's working really well.
Yeah, I mean, one question we get is somebody didn't probably look too close at the setup guide. They plugged in the audio directly into this rather than into the camera, and then you lose sync between the video and audio. Now I'm talking and you don't hear me, and then a few seconds later my voice comes across. You get that question, and I mean, it took me 10 seconds to figure out what they were doing because one question, oh, we've got it plugged into the H.264 box.
And using that, we can build an FAQ to kind of put those solutions out to the community.
Another thing just to add to that is, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong because I'm not always on the Yammer network that much, but it seems as though some of the questions that come up about how the application works are centered around like the example that you just meant. It's really the hardware stuff.
The software works phenomenally.
Yeah.
It rarely has issue. Even with our setups, I rarely run into issues. Now, I've had OS X crash before our app gives an issue. Sometimes things happen, different updates, and it's not so much centered around our app, but in OS X there's a underlying process called Apple Events, and that handles the communication of AppleScript. So I've had Apple Events crash and not start up properly. So our app is no longer able to communicate with that third-party app that fires the lights on and off. It's not our app that has issue. It's just the OS has lost Apple Events for whatever reason. Those are much more typical. Those sorts of things are much more typical than an issue with our app.
So I just kind of wanted to transition a little bit and just talk about another issue that we had. So Apple has deprecated the QuickTime
Qt Kit.
Well, it's not just Qt, but it's the QuickTime framework. You can still use the functionality from the QuickTime framework, but they are deprecating it. And so they deprecated it in favor of avfoundations. However, and this is a big however for me anyway, it wasn't just avfoundations. It's avfoundations and this thing called Video Toolkit. And so in the code,
so this section of the code handles the display of the video. So we use avfoundations for the recorded video, converting it into something that's usable. This is just that display. So when the camera popped up on screen and you could see what was in front of the camera, which was you guys, this is what that does. And in order to do that, again, because this isn't a video device, our app has to receive each frame, uncompress it, pipe it through OpenGL for a displayed layer.
and just even to add to that, it's not just even uncompress it, right? It has to decode it, uncompress it, send it to OpenGL. And so the way it was done, back in the day, so to speak, is you use QuickTime's framework. And there's this thing called the image description handler. And so you set up that handler, and then this is where I had to really educate myself on what it is, what H.264 video really is, what the bytes are, what they're actually certain bits and bytes that tell you about other bits and bytes in the stream.
And AB frames. And
I had to learn all the stuff he
GOV
knows in his
settings.
sleep.
I don't know about that, but
Trust me, you know this stuff. So anyway, so the way it was done with QuickTime's framework is basically they had this object that was this object that is an image description. This guy right here. And then you set the object up correctly, and there's all of these cryptic values that I had to find out about. And once you set them up, like this is an atom code, a version, a profile, a level. All of these things are literally, when you break it down, they're the bytes that describe the rest of the stream. And so all of this stuff was had to be configured. And then at the end of it, matter of fact, before the end of it, you even have to do some special things for iTunes. Like if you want to play this video in iTunes or in the movie part of iTunes, right? And we don't necessarily have to do that, but this is all the different things that had to go into to creating the preview, not the video that we give to the user, but the preview. And then once that stuff is set up correctly, then again we send it to OpenGL. And where is it? One sec. Right. So here, let me make this a little bit bigger. We're basically we're taking the information and literally writing it to the screen, bits and bytes basically, from our video display that is streaming to our display on our computer or whatever we're displaying it on, right? Now, this was all done with QuickTime's framework. To do that now, we would have to use Video Toolbox. And one of the issues with Video Toolbox was there wasn't any documentation for it. As a matter of fact, if you look it up now, you're not going to find too much, if any, Apple documentation for Video Toolbox. Like literally last night, I found their sample code for Video Toolbox that was put up on May 2014. I've been dealing with this problem way before that. They've had the header files in, I think it was from OS 10.7 or 10.8. And so the documentation for me was just the header files. Like I had to kind of figure out what was going on. And Video Toolbox specifically dealt with the compression and decompression of video. And so whereas I was, in my reading, I saw that avfoundations was the replacement for QuickTime's framework. I was looking through avfoundations for this type of functionality. I wasn't finding it. And it wasn't until I went to the developer message boards where some guy just said, hey, you probably need Video Toolbox. And then I looked it up, couldn't find anything except for a WWDC talk about it, where they kind of lined up what it's replacing. And so it helped me down that line to try to figure out what to do. And that's something that we're working on right now is replacing the QuickTime.
OpenGL stuff, yeah.
Yeah, QuickTime. Well, the OpenGL stuff we probably may not replace, because even if you use a Video Toolbox, well, as a matter of fact, we could. It's a balance right now, because you can still use OpenGL. You can use some of the functionality that avfoundation provides for you if you give it video rightly formatted. And then you can also use this thing called Quartz to display video on the screen. So there's a few things that we have to decide.
So the hope is that when we get it out of the video toolbox, we can process the bytes into frames in such a way that we can pipe it then into avfoundations. The reason we want to do that is so we can reuse the same code when we add USB camera support, so that we just have, it's using one or the other as far as processing, or it's using processing or not really, and then it's going into the same view. And this is also important, Video Toolbox is important for us simply because if we want to implement this in 64-bit, we need Video Toolbox. So the Quicktime framework is only 32-bit.
I feel your pain.
Not only is it deprecated, but it's only 32-bit.
So let me talk about that.
What's that?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so there's core video, but it's at the, so if you see the I guess the graphical breakdown of the layering, I believe Video Toolbox should be, Video Toolbox is a little bit lower than Core Video, and Core Video won't get you, Core Video's functions don't get you the input coming from this.
It won't recognize TS.
Right.
But if you feed it in to a format that it recognizes,
Right.
then you can go straight AV
Yeah.
Foundation. all the way.
So here's the thing. AV Foundations, if I can, so it's AV input device. If I do AV input devices,
I've got solutions though.
listen, I want to be your friend.
I'll trade you the code from the button.
So that button has all, like, that, we just mapped the button to the space bar, and that comes with its own software that you can map it to an Apple script.
Add an SDK kit and then.
Well, no, it runs, and you just say, okay, press of the button runs an Apple script, or it's mapped to a keyboard,
Yeah.
or it does this, or it does that. There's a slew of functions. Long press of the button, or spin of the wheel, or, I mean, you can do it quite a bit. It's a pretty powerful button.
So just a quick thing.
buttons go.
So again, AV device input devices, right? If you run that object, that function, devices, if it came up with this or the box, then it, like Ben was saying, probably, I don't know, like 50% of this code is gone.
Yeah, you use preview mode created with three lines of code.
Basically. But
And then import it directly.
and we even thought about, well, they thought about having me write a driver for it, and I was like, no. But I mean, that's the extent you would have to go to. And again, to tell you the truth, Video Toolbox is actually from the Linux community, so to speak. So they were using this way before Apple was, because Apple had QuickTime's framework, right? So a lot of the code that I looked at from a FFmpeg or XMBC used Video Toolbox, and then their implementation on the Mac used Video Toolbox from Apple. And so, I got like I got a crash course in Video Toolbox. But again, there's slight differences that Apple does to those libraries. And so again, those are things that we're still working on.
And the other advantage of Video Toolbox for us is we can decrease. So we're only going to use it for the display. We're still going to just continue to record the TS stream straight to a file
Right.
and then process it. But for the display, we're okay with a couple drop frames. We're more than okay with a couple drop frames because it's just for reference. Oh, I should stand here rather than here on the video. So one of the things we want to be able to do is reduce the buffer size of the stream coming in to what's being displayed so that we can reduce that delay. So there's currently about a 2.5 to 3 second delay. We want to get it down to just as close to hardware delay as possible. Right.
And another thing, just to go back to something that Justin spoke of, that 64-bit versus that 32-bit. So at some point, Apple's probably just going to stop, right?
It's deprecated. It's deprecated for a reason too.
It's been deprecated for a little bit now, right? It's been a while.
10.5,
So,
I think.
Yeah. So there's that aspect, and the code right now is not. It's not ARC compliant, right? It's you're still going to see retains and release, and more allocs and deallocs and all that stuff than you would probably see in some more modern code. Now I have a branch of this that works. And I have ARC turned on, the arithmetic reference counting. It's basically automatic, sorry. And it's basically the garbage collecting, technically. It's kind of iffy on that, but it's garbage collecting. Yeah, right. Okay. See, I knew it was going to start this war.
It's recycling.
Memory management.
That's a better way to say. Yes. Thank you.
Trash.
Don't shoot me, please. No, but so. I have a branch of that that it works, and that's another thing too, is that I can't necessarily have I can't put Video Toolbox into I have to make my application 64-bit compliant, so to speak, or make it for the 64-bit architecture to even run Video Toolbox, right? So I literally have to break it and fix it first before I can even run Video Toolbox. And then I don't know if any of you had to deal with changing code that wasn't ARC to ARC, but you have to put in these bridge function. It's almost like a casting. There are so again, Video Toolbox. Yeah, so there's some bridge typecasting, but Video Toolbox actually uses some core foundation things in them. Right. What else?
Rewriting it and fixing it and all this, are you just going to go straight to Swift where you can?
So
Because they can live side by side.
So they can live side by side. I am thinking about that, but there's just so much that we've already done from the Objective-C side. I mean, even with fixes, like so. But I mean, ultimately, for this project and other projects that we've written, I'm definitely looking into Swift. It's a little bit more of a modern language, so to speak. It's definitely less verbose. That was one thing coming from Ruby to Objective-C. Again,
So it's kind of like going back again.
you know, just. But again, I say that, and then I still see the power. I mean, Objective-C, you know, it has its small talkisms in it, you know, and it's a very powerful language. I understand why it's verbose. There's a reason why Java is verbose. There's a reason for that verbosity. But again, it was just something that I wasn't used to.
It was unusual, but I loved it. It's like create circle with radius of radius
Oh, yeah.
and color of color.
It's very descriptive. As a developer, you know what you're doing. You know what I'm saying? But again, it was so. I before I was doing Ruby, I was only doing Java, like heavy, like WebSphere and J2E applications, all this other stuff. And then so that move from Ruby to Ruby was kind of like, wow, I can do so much in like this much code. But again, there's a time and place for everything, right? Sometimes those scripting languages have their strengths, and the compiled languages have their strengths. Yeah, I think that's basically it. That's basically all the code issues that we've been
Major
facing.
ones, anyhow.
Well, yeah, the major ones. Hopefully, I can talk about this, but we even have a experimental version of this OBS that works on a Raspberry Pi and things like that. So we're even going that route, and so we're doing a lot of different things, basically.
Yeah, and that's all Python with CGI. It's just a web app that runs an
Basically.
entire studio, or can run an entire studio. The
Basically-
biggest issue with that is syncing the audio.
We're seeing a lot more students, or less students carrying this, and more students carrying one of these,
Right.
right? Obviously, so we want to be able to adapt this product and leverage that technology that they have in their pocket, any way we can. So
Maybe with the beacon stuff.
yeah.
So that's, we're going to add it to this.
Get that video onto your iOS device.
Yeah.
We already have that working. We're using iBeacons for some of
We
that
have
as
it
well,
working
so-
with our Raspberry Pi prototype. We're going to be adding it at some point to the functionality here. The Raspberry Pi was easy. That was
Yeah. Oh man.
the basically the GPU that the camera's fed into handles everything perfectly. You don't have to do a whole lot.
Well, we have just about 8 minutes left. So, were there any other questions that are lingering around? We'll be happy to answer.
Go ahead.
I don't know if I missed this in the beginning, but you said it requires the user to click and approve to get the volumes.
Initially,
That's upon launch of the app. So when we run it in kiosk mode, the person working with it does that. I am looking at building, and I just haven't gotten around to it, but an automator script that will. So one of the things that we like to do, typically if there's any support need for the studio, it's just reboot the computer once in a while. And so I want to call this automator script, which will launch the application and then do that for you, because it will retain the path, the file path to the volumes directory if you've done it once. You just have to hit choose at that point. So I want to create an automator script that'll happen. And as you were saying with Morse code on the button, I'd also like to, if I can find the time for it, do Morse code on the button to just, or some combination to just reboot the computer. So a librarian could walk in, tap, 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 and it does it itself. They don't have to pull out a keyboard because there's no keyboard plugged into this studio at all. Or if there is, it's in the cabinet. So we're not going to give users that option.
I mean, we could though.
We could, but we're not going to.
So did you want to move that file to a different volume then, or something like that?
What do you mean?
Yeah.
by-
So what is it that you need to do with volume? Just
So
volume?
because we're copying to the thumb drive.
No, locally.
it's a sandbox issue.
Well,
Yeah.
well, two things. Just so we're clear, it's writing locally to the hard drive, regardless,
But you
and
can
then
just write it to the temporary directory and move it to the desktop, and then
So
I mean we could save it anyway.
Right.
But I mean, like we decided to save it in like movies.
Movies.
that's so we're saving the file locally, but the idea is that the user doesn't have to deal with the file. We automatically copy it. And in order to have access to their thumb drive without them every time saying, yes, I give you permission to write to my... So we're removing that step from the user of having to do something. So when, at the beginning of the launch of the app, when we give access to the volumes directory, then we automatically have access to anyone's thumb drive until the app is shut down. And since we leave it on, any thumb drive brought in, as long as it's formatted FAT or Mac OS, whatever, yeah. There's a couple old ones too. But when they plug in, it doesn't matter what the name of the mount point is, it'll save to it.
It's similar to your cell phone, right? There's certain things like if they have to get to your address book, you have to okay that. It's that type of
And that's just a
mentality.
policy to get on the App Store. So
Yeah.
our first version, you didn't have to do that.
Right.
But that was a policy for getting on the App Store.
We have an application where, we have a counseling center, we have to record all the videos and have painful solution videos trying to find a way to, it needs to go into the user's folder. But we also have to have that OpenGL, whenever that stream, available to the professors wherever they are in the building, to be able to tap in and watch.
Live stream it?
Right, yeah, but they don't need it, it doesn't need to be an actual physical, that physical one just gets saved in one location.
Right.
They just need to tap into that stream whenever,
Push it to a Wowza server or something like that.
So do you think your app, this would work well for that solution?
So you can mount, I believe, you could do an auto mount to like a Wowza, watch folder, which I've seen work. But what I don't know is if Wowza will auto segment the file for you. So to stream it properly through HTTP, you have to segment that file, the transport stream file. unless you're writing the end user application, which you probably don't want to do.
Which is what that was, again, what he's talking about is another issue that we came up with, we ran into, I should say.
Yeah, if we were willing to segment our TS file, we could use the avfoundations and pipe it to the stream, but we would be increasing delay. That's why we didn't do it. So if you use Wowza in conjunction with FFmpeg, you probably can easily segment that file.
We don't care about the delay, because they're in a whole
Right, right. But it won't stream, like, your stream can't start until that segment of file is finished writing. So typically when you stream via HTTP, you'll write 2 or 3 seconds of a TS file, and then you'll start 2 or 3 seconds of another TS file. The user gets to watch the first 3 seconds, and then when this next file is done, they buffer that up and watch it. So they might be 2 or 3 segments behind, which is fine, it sounds, for your use case, but you have to have that segmentation going on. You can probably get FFmpeg to do it pretty easily in conjunction with the Wowza watch folder.
And I would just add too,
And it would already be HTML5.
I think it's Apple Streaming Media Server kind of does that as well. But I don't know, like FFmpeg just does so much that, I mean, if you can use it and it's free, you know, yeah, it's built in.
I think really what she's asking is, will you please add?
We will not add that.
We've been asked before.
But I mean, if you have somebody that knows how to run FFmpeg in a Wowza server, it would not be hard to do, because you just mount the a network drive to the device, and it will push that file up there. And FFmpeg on the fly should be able to segment that file as it's writing.
And does it matter how many people are getting into that stream?
Well, as much as the server as much as the Wowza server can handle. So as beefy as the box you give it.
If you need lots of people doing the same stream, you're going to need something.
All that's all that segmenting and serving will happen on the server that you're mounting locally. So it won't actually happen here on the Mac Mini or whatever machine you're using. So yeah, you could do it. We're not going to. I have no use for it. We have no use case so far that would.
If you
require
convinced
that.
him to do it, I would do it for you. No, I'm just
Well, thank you again. Really appreciate everyone coming out today.
That localization service I was talking about,
Yeah.
it's on crowded.net, and it's free for open source and academic, and it costs for
Got it.
nice.
crowded.net.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Enjoy lunch.
Thank you.